right, here we are. Psychedelics today. Psychedelist. Joined today by Louis Dorian, who runs Psychedelist. How you doing today?
Great to be here, Joe. Thanks for having me on the show. Excited.
Yeah, long time coming. Seems like we have some philosophical alignment. We're going to have an interesting and fun conversation. So let's start at the top and share a little bit about what is Psychedelist.
Yeah, I've been honing that idea for a while to say it in the most bite-sized possible way because it's an enormous platform. Basically, now I've settled on calling it, a global cyber city geared towards all things supportive to this emerging psychedelic movement. We've got treatment section that is a broad treatment section. We're not just focused on entheogen usage. We're focused on mental health as a whole. So we have meditation coaches, breath coaches, sound bath healers, Reiki and energy healers. And of course, we do have those engaged in the use of entheogens and plant medicines, facilitators, guides, trip sitters, shamans, et cetera. And then up from there, we've got organizational level treatment and guidance facilities, if you will, retreat centers and clinics. So that's the treatment side. On the other side of that, we've got a learning center, which some people would call the blog. We're working on expanding that much further. That's going to become a bigger and bigger kind of universe there with all types of information. We encourage the listers on our site to provide their own content because a lot of them are experts in their field and have an enormous amount of information to share. So they're sharing content on video form and in written form. And of course, it is an advertising platform. It's also community support. It's also informational. So those listers are advertising their services on our site. We have a product side as well. That's where we get into the, interesting aspect of legalities, the emerging, social perspective change on what's happening and what's going on legally. But we've got everything from sonic vibrational equipment, Amazonian ceremonial herbs, hape, sananga, those type of things. We've also got blue lotus flower and amanita products, but then we also have in the gray market space the psilocybin products, even a couple of DMT products and sacred cactus mescaline-based products like peyote and San Pedro cactus. So it is a rather bold move in that area, but I believe in it, and we can talk more about what I believe there and why we did that. We've also got a legal advice section with attorneys. We're attempting to get more attorneys on. We haven't actually devoted any serious advertising or marketing towards that, but that it will be coming. We've got a lab testing resource section that is kind of slow right now in building because actually we're going to integrate that more, we've decided, and have kind of badges and seals of approval and verification, including one that I really am sort of quickly falling in love with, this sort of secret shopper idea to monitor products that are out there to see that these product companies are maintaining the standard that they come in with an initial lab test. So we're excited about that. We've got a schooling, training, and accreditation resource section launching within the next probably two weeks or so. We're running into some complications with how that's all integrated. That's just boring dev stuff, but that's coming. Mm-hmm. We're doing a B2B section, which is going to be really our crowning jewel that links the entire kind of city, if you will, back to that cyber city, with ancillary support services for the businesses that are on there, including, things like payment processing, high-risk payment processing, insurance options, child safety packaging options, web designing, brand development, POS systems. So much is going to go into that. So as you can see, it's a lot. It's a mouthful to even just get it out and say what we do.
Yeah, amazing. Now let's dig into you. How did you get here? The psychedelic topic is a weird one, and sometimes it takes a strange path to get here.
Wild path for me, extremely unpredictable and winding. I don't think I could have ever, 1995 was the year when I had my first psychedelic experience. There's no way in this world you could have convinced me that we'd be here today doing this. I mean, we could have had a Back to Future moment and Michael J. Fox came and said, "Hey, I'm the future you and this is what you're going to do." And I'd say, "No, you're out of your mind. There's no way." So, back then it was the rave days. I lived in an interesting household, had a bit of a traumatic upbringing. My father was psychologically, verbally abusive. Some interesting stuff there. My dad was not forthcoming about his history and past. took me some time to figure out that he had, my dad was born in 1930 in Manhattan, and he had some involvement with the Italian mafia, and yet was a math professor. So it's a really odd thing. And my parents were, they were atheists. So my parents were kind of proud, what they would consider, educated, atheists, basically, that believed in science, intellectuals, but with this old kind of mentality of, you get out there and you get a good job, and that's what life's about. And it felt really empty. And I was growing up in a violent area. I grew up in the informative years anyway. We moved around a little bit when I was younger, but going to school and things in San Bernardino, was exposed to gangs and violence. And first drug deal I witnessed, I was in like 5th grade. First stabbings and shootings was at that time frame. There was a lot of questions I had, and a lot of emptiness, and a lot of feelings of like, what are we doing here? This just seems pointless. And so in 1995, I got involved with psychedelics, just trying to figure stuff out. And I didn't do it the same way most people did. This is actually important to how I arrived here as well. I was involved in martial arts because of the violence. So I had an early interest in martial arts. I wanted to be able to defend myself and deal with the environment I was in. And I had an early martial arts teacher that believed that there were mindsets that were conducive to being more effective in a self-defense scenario or in a physically dynamic setting. And of course, athletes to this day are, not necessarily in combat sports, but in all sports, are trying to find that flow state, right? And that was what I was attempting to do when I first engaged. LSD was the first psychedelic I engaged with. And I didn't have a profound experience with psychedelics until about my third time. And that was when that's a story in itself. But anyway, fast forward, as I was kind of going through the experience, my parents discovered that I was engaging with psychedelics, and it was a very negative perspective on their part. And I became at odds with my family. I actually was homeless for a while in between kind of the college years and high school. Eventually caved and began kind of living this double lifestyle, going to raves, going to desert parties, doing LSD and psilocybin and MDMA and things like that. And then during the weekdays and at home, kind of acting like the good son that was, going to school and trying to follow my father's footsteps to be a mathematician. I actually did get a math degree. I actually got a master's in mathematics. I was working on a PhD, and my father died. And this is also important to the story. My father's death was a very painful and torturous death from colon cancer. And he began to question his own spirituality, began to question if there wasn't something more out there instead of the atheistic viewpoint he had, and was in a state of fear and enormous pain and suffering, and it created a lot of PTSD for me. My father and I, of course, did not have a very smooth relationship. We had a lot of friction, a lot of difficulty, and so his death was just this huge implosion in my life. And then I got to experience Western medical psychiatric care, and that also is a breadcrumb along this journey. Terrible experience with Western medical psychiatric care, just awful. Tried to pump me full of a bunch of drugs. I was really frightened because I was going through massive panic attacks, like 15 a day. I was like vomiting, losing consciousness. At the time, I used to smoke a lot of cannabis, honestly, and cannabis was triggering panic attacks immediately. And then I had discontinued cannabis and any type of ingestion of any substance, including psychedelics, and was still experiencing just complete mental breakdown. And the doctors there told me that I was brain damaged from using LSD and psilocybin and cannabis, which almost led to my suicide, because I thought, okay, what hope is there? And I kind of got sucked into that. And then luckily, through kind of a turn of events, which becomes too much detail, I met a decent Western psychiatrist therapist who said he wasn't going to give me drugs, explained the nature of fight or flight symptoms and how grief was tied into it, and then encouraged me to get involved with some of my old martial arts people, where then I was actually introduced to medical Qigong breathing techniques that saved my life. That actually saved my life. And then my father's death, I became disillusioned with becoming a mathematician. I wasn't particularly passionate about math anyway. I wasn't terrible at it. I do enjoy solving puzzles, but it wasn't my path. And I worked for the government for a little bit, got fired on purpose, jumped straight into the cannabis prohibition era of making money. And I call this my lost years. I was just kind of chasing money, chasing parties, chasing girls, that kind of stuff. Living a very dangerous life. I actually ended up being incarcerated a couple of times. I was almost killed more than once. I was in a home invasion robbery that was really, they were going to murder us. So that was a very serious situation. Survived all of that, and then in 2008 met one of the greatest loves of my life, just an insane romance. And then by 2014, she died of a drug overdose as a result of a murder she witnessed. So it's really interesting when you look at ripple effects. My life to this day is being affected by a murder I was never a party to or even knew of or was around, and it's having this ripple effect on my life. And as I began to go through that grieving and healing process with her death, and I'm a surfer, I spent a lot of time in the water and the ocean, I began to kind of get downloads, even without psychedelics. You know, people talk about spiritual downloads. I started to have those. And then I started to get back involved with psychedelics, and I began developing and working on a type of trauma processing that I would call is a mixture between kind of guided meditation, hypnotherapy or hypnotism, and Gestalt therapy all combined. And I mixed that with psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD, and MDMA, and things like that. And that was a potent result. And over time, I'm in the martial arts community out here. I do jiu-jitsu and things like that. I would meet people like, hey, what are you up to? And they started to notice a change. And next thing you know, people started saying, hey, I know someone who's a veteran. They're struggling. Do you mind if they talk to you? Somehow I arrived and started to facilitate for people and take them to the desert and doing, psychedelic facilitation with them. And one day I woke up and I decided we needed the platform that is Psychedelis today. That was we quote unquote, broke ground on Psychedelis in June of 2021. So that's the condensed flyover. I'm writing a whole novel about this. So it's a big story.
Yeah, that's a handful of a story. So thanks for sharing that and doing it so quickly, because that could have easily taken a couple hours at least.
Easily. Yeah, I'm trying to get better at it because I talk to a lot of people now. So I'm trying to give how do I do this flyover and just give you the bullet points.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And whereabouts are you living today?
I'm in the Carlsbad area. North San Diego. Yeah.
Great.
It's a good place for what we're doing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so people are putting themselves up on Psychedelist. They're getting kind of, attention, right? They can get some business there. And that's excellent. We need more directories to help us figure out, how can we find what we need here? And, I go to the end of the earth to find some things I need, and it's complicated. It'd be lovely if it was a lot easier. Yeah. And I think there's some harm reduction with that too. Can you speak a little bit about prohibition and drug war harms, and then maybe how that's informed your vision around Psychedelist?
Yeah, and so stop me if I start to go too deep into this, but I'm pretty passionate about this stuff. And I grew up in the DARE era, the true meat and potatoes of the Just Say No and Nancy Reagan. And as a kid, I always had this antenna. And I remember being kids in those elementary school and junior high school days when the DARE program would come and the Just Say No stuff would come. And I remember how cheesy and just inauthentic it felt. It just felt like, what are we doing here? It's just crap. And there was hypocrisy in it because you knew there was alcohol. Even as kids, we kind of knew wait a second. And why is alcohol, you're called getting drunk, but if you do some other substance, you're getting high, and that's a big no-no. But, there's a lot of things that already seemed wrong is my point. But when you get into the depths of the history of it, and you look at, P.F. Skinner and what he did with the Skinner box tests and the complete, ignoring of the social aspect of rodents and especially rats, and then you look at the complete difference when you look at Bruce K. Alexander's studies, Bruce K. Alexander, of course, being the Canadian scientist that did rat heart, and the profound change in results, it points to something really fundamental and going, okay, what's going on, right? And I think at the basic level of this, we have to admit that even cross species, but especially the human species, Homo sapiens, that there's a natural inclination to alter one's consciousness. And so when you look at that natural inclination and you get directly in the way of that and you outlaw this, what happens, right? And what you see is a power exchange that starts to take place, right? It's a clear example when you look at the Volstead Act and prohibition of alcohol and what happened. We would not have the level of organized crime that came out of that era had we not made alcohol illegal and then seen what happened to organized crime, for instance, Italian mafia organized crime, Jewish mafia organized crime, Irish organized crime. All of that stuff really centered and exploded over that prohibition of alcohol. And then what happened? It just went away. They repealed it and went back to normal. And then what did those groups do? They went into the opioid trade. They went into heroin sales. And that lasted for a long time. But one of the things that I think shows an enormous one of the ones I like to show how useless and sad a result it has been of this war on drugs is talking about methamphetamine. Now, I know we're here to talk about psychedelics, but I want to just show how bad it really can be when you get involved in this massive interdiction effort to supposedly stop some harmful substance. When you look at methamphetamine, you can look at what happened in the 1990s, and this was a time when I was growing up. This is sort of like the bikers. The biker gangs were controlling that trade, and they, were selling it for a very high dollar amount. It was actually worth more than cocaine at the time. It was like, I don't know, $30,000 a pound maybe, and that's just an estimate. I don't know. I wasn't buying methamphetamine in the 90s. The point is that that's probably a pretty good estimate of what it was. And then what was the interdiction efforts by the federal government and even state and local governments was to go after precursor chemicals. And what did they do? They went after red iodine. They went after, of course, the famous, pseudoephedrine. Now you can't even go to your local drugstore and buy cold medicine over the counter, because if you do, you can't. You have to show ID, do all this stuff. And what that effectively did is it changed the dynamic. Did it stop methamphetamine production? No, not at all. In fact, it drove methamphetamine production down to Mexico, where far more organized cartel groups that were created by the prohibitions on cocaine and heroin products and opioid products. They've been very, very powerful groups that then had far more resources to then manufacture more pure and more massive amounts of methamphetamine than ever were seen in history before. Today, if you were to buy a pound of methamphetamine, remember we're talking in the mid-90s, 30,000. Today we're looking at $800 a pound. You tell me, and purer than it ever was. Look how effective that interdiction was. What did that do? And what has it done? You look at examples like Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and you look at Portugal, and they're a little different, but Amsterdam's a really great one. What did they do with drugs? They really followed kind of what the results were of that Bruce K. Alexander study, right? They made heroin not legal, not decriminalized. They made it free. They made it actually free. You go into a state-run hospital or clinic, you present as an addict that needs this medication. You're seen not as a stigmatized, deviant person. You're seen as a person dealing with a clinical health issue, and you're given this product for free. And what happens? The theft goes out the window, the stealing, the shoplifting, all those problems go out the window immediately. Now you got a person who doesn't have to think about where they're getting the next fix. Now they're thinking, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Maybe I don't want to be a heroin addict the rest of my life. Maybe I want to figure out other things. Maybe there are better things in the future for me. Were there some people who stayed on heroin for the rest of their life? Yes, there are still people this day in Amsterdam who are quote unquote functioning heroin addicts. But so what? You won't go there and see people with raw sewage in the street and people stealing and those seedy marketplaces and things like that. It's not what's going on. It's really sad what happened in Oregon and in Vancouver and these places where they just decriminalized, gave no social support, gave no attention to why people are engaging in addiction and those things. So that's, and that's at the most deepest level. When we start talking about cannabis and what happened there with prohibition, we start looking at what are the risk factors involved with cocaine and why is it such a prohibited substance. We start to compare those with the risk factors with alcohol and things like that. We start to end up with a world of extreme hypocrisy and contradiction. Even the fact that diacetylmorphine is a Schedule II substance, not Schedule II, it's a Schedule I, meaning it has no therapeutic value, is an absolute strange thing. If you really look at that and you look at Dilaudid, which is hydromorphone, or you look at morphine, or you look at hydrocodone, oxycodone, oxymorphone, fentanyl, right, the big one now. Those are all Schedule IIs, and yet diacetylmorphine is Schedule I and claim to have no therapeutic value whatsoever. That even shows you right there what's really going on. We've got some massive moving parts here. We got pharmaceutical companies with massive interests in certain chemicals and maintaining certain, legislative structures. We've got, rehab revolving doors. We've got privatized prisons. We've got a whole enormous multi-billion-dollar infrastructure benefiting from harming people. It is harming people. And so that's where I fall with all of it, in a nutshell.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. I think Johan Hari did a really good job profiling this situation and chasing the scream in Switzerland where people can very safely maintain a heroin habit for their whole life. And the bloodborne pathogen rate is next to nothing in Switzerland now, due to no one sharing needles, which is amazing. And we're seeing similar stuff in Portugal too. Yeah, I need to dig in more on the Amsterdam situation, but from what I understand, yeah, there's some really great data there as well. And you familiar with Milton Friedman?
No.
Milton Friedman was like this very interesting, kind of like, honestly, a conservative economist who said that if we wanted this kind of crazy drug war scenario and like all the harm and all the incarceration, this is the exact drug policy that we would enact. It's the absolute worst thing if we want cartel violence to go away and overdose deaths to go away. It's yeah, it's really problematic. And I assume you're familiar with the Dr. David Nutt harm scale that got published in the Lancet a bunch of years ago.
Yeah, but I'm only familiar with it because everyone keeps bringing it to my attention, and I haven't actually reviewed it myself. But yeah.
Yeah, and you can read it, but
Yeah.
there's also just the chart, right? And the two safest drugs. So the concept was he was commissioned by the government, the UK government, who's kind of the drug czar at that point, to I think he made the argument that said, hey, let's come up with a drug or science-based drug policy. And he profiled, the most common drugs used by humans in the UK. And turns out LSD and psilocybin were two of the three safest compounds. And then alcohol being the most harmful. And the result, he was promptly fired by the UK government for publishing those results in an amazing medical journal.
How dare you share the truth?
And meth was in there. It was pretty harmful. Cocaine, I think, was in there, and it was surprisingly a lot less harmful than alcohol. Cannabis was right in the middle. So yeah, let's do it in a science-based fashion. And when we get to the point where we have regs, let's do taxation in a science-based fashion to get the result that we want for the people, right?
Yeah. And I think we should be careful with human nature and what is one of the problems I see with species, at just our species in general, and this ability we have because of our prefrontal cortex, is that we seem to be able to override instinct. And overriding instinct may be important in some scenarios, but in others it may be causing an enormous amount of harm. And that starts to kind of show up. And this is why my personal perspective on psychology is that sociology is actually the foundation of psychology. So sociological impingement and impact is what's really at a larger scale impacting psychology as a whole. And of course, substance abuse and addiction dependency issues are very much tied to sociological environments that we're creating. And you can see this in other rather dark ways. You look at Pakistan Sharia law and what it's done to child predation and things like that. It's a frightening and dark thing. I'm not going to go down that road on here, but the point is that sociologically speaking, we need to be careful in really looking at what is our natural inclinations, how much of those natural inclinations are really important to not over curb, and of course, where are the natural inclinations that we need to curb a bit, because obviously you get angry and you go beat your neighbor up. Like that's not a positive natural inclination, right? So we know there's lines here, but obviously there's some things we need to take into consideration. For instance, if in the context of the Bruce K. Alexander studies of rat heart, right, including a positive and healthy social environment structure for those rodents, for those rats, completely changed the substance abuse results. And I think that's an important thing to look at. And I don't know, sometimes we over compartmentalize aspects in this scientific, approach, or we're just leaving parameters out that are just really important that I think need to be included in these studies. But I couldn't agree with you more. Let's bring science into it.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. So there's some comments coming in here and there. Someone says, I'm a forensic scientist and sociologist, and I agree. So awesome. There's an X account, DEA on X. It says, drugs aren't safe or dangerous. LSD is 1 million times stronger than alcohol. That's completely uncritical thinking now. And I want to, rephrase what I said. The study from the Lancet did an analysis, harm to self and harm to others. And it wasn't about safety, but it was around harm to self and harm to others. And I often crib that into safety. But that's the more accurate way to say it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is LSD dangerous? Of course it is. And in fact, my experience with LSD, which is that's the psychedelic I have the most experience with, I've seen harm. I've seen people be harmed by LSD. Of course I have. But I've seen a whole lot of people be harmed by alcohol, way more than I've seen with LSD. And that's just anecdotal. It's not scientific. So fair enough, right? But also the question of safety is a whole nother deeper question. We start to get into kind of the idea of governance and governmental, appropriate interdiction and interaction with people's lives. And this idea of where do we draw the line between safety and liberty, and should adults be prevented from putting certain substances in their body? One of the things I love about the war on drugs, that this idea drives me crazy. If you watch certain legal proceedings, there's this idea that there are certain substances, and we aren't talking about like nuclear, like fissile material or anything like that. We're talking about opioids or stimulants or something like this. Certain substances are categorized as no living person has the right to obtain or possess those substances. I think that's absurd. That's the craziest idea in the world when we're talking about what I'm going to put in my own body. There's a lot of debatability there. We can talk about that. But I think safety and liberty are very touchy subjects, and there's a line there that we don't all necessarily agree on. And it's a conversation. I think it's an open-ended conversation that we could have for a very long, period of time. But yeah, the question then is, in your pursuit of safety, are you sure that you're actually achieving safety, or are you actually engaging in more harm caused? And that's a valid question when you look at the world.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, there's a quote from Terence McKenna I've been butchering lately, and I'll try again here. And it's if the Bill of Rights does not grant you the right to experiment with your own mind and psyche, then it is not worth the piece of hemp it was written on. Something along those lines. And, we're obviously in interesting political times, but I think that still holds, right? If we don't have self-ownership and agency, then what do we have? Not much.
No.
So I think that's a big portion of what this fight is about. And I support everybody's right to self-experiment with whatever they choose. I just really wish that they would learn as much as possible about the potential consequences of what could happen to them. I've had amazing stuff on LSD. I've had some difficult things on LSD, and I was just with a friend this weekend, and the story he told me is, oh my goodness gracious, difficult stuff can happen, but how much difficult stuff happens from alcohol use, and it's complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's one of the things that I would say too is I think that with this topic on substances for many years now, and I think maybe we're starting to slowly emerge out of this era, but it's very much like the old hi-ho silver, white hat, black hat, old Western perspective of drugs. There's good substances and bad substances, and it's good and bad, and it's just clear and cut and dry, and all drug dealers are bad people, and they get lumped in with the murderers and the rapists, and it's pretty wild to me because I've known some drug dealers who are pretty damn ethical, and and if you wear a lab coat and a white coat and you've got the backing of the authoritative body, you could sell drugs, and that's fine. We saw what happened with Purdue Pharma when that went down. It's just very interesting because people place this kind of rather juvenile. I think it's very juvenile to look at it from that white hat, black and white perspective of substances. Substances, extremely complex area of human experimentation, exploration, experience, and I think that what you're talking about, that skill development phase, is the most important. I think it's the most important for mental health in general. That's why I chose the name Psychedelist. Psychedelist, if you think dentist, physicist, violinist, someone who's skilled at something, that's what we're about. We're not telling you to run off and do drugs at all. In fact, I would encourage you not to. Why put anything in your body that can be a risk unless you really need to, or you have that deep passion you want to explore. You want to be that astronaut. You want to, take that ayahuasca or DMT because you are passionate and you're willing to accept the risks that might come with it. But if you're not, why would you do that? If you're happy and you're at peace, you don't need to take any extra risks. There's no reason for you to put that stuff in your body. There's so much more to this discussion is my point. And I think, a lot of that nuance has been missed for many, many decades now. We're finally starting to get to a point where we can talk about the skills that are so important in addressing this, and that's really what it's about. And education is it. That's exactly it. I think, hey, you go in and you buy a pack of cigarettes, it has a big Surgeon General warning on it, tells you, hey, you could get cancer, it causes all these problems, right? You still want to smoke those cigarettes? I don't want to tell you not to. We're starting to get to a point, actually, we're getting there. Now there's cities here in San Diego where you can't even smoke on the sidewalk. I think that's absurd. I don't agree with that. You want to ingest tobacco. I don't think tobacco companies should be able to poison their tobacco with all kinds of extra drugs without a deep disclosure, at least. I don't know. But the point is, right, that we give people the education and allow adults to make their own decisions. I think that's what the nature of being a free adult should be. There's risks. There's always going to be risks in life. And, you can't child-proof or adult-proof everything so that they can't even just live a life of exploration and a reward of living in that. A lot of things that people do, mountain climbing, ice surf, some people surf giant waves, which is pretty wild. There's inherent risk involved. That I ride motorcycles. I ride Ducati V4 Panigale. That's a very dangerous motorcycle. I know the risks that are involved with that. I know the skills that I need to maintain if I'm going to continue to ride that bike, especially if I'm going to ride that bike at performance levels. Yeah, that's what I think it's all about. We need to get the information out there and really, really tell people, please educate yourself, because you absolutely can be harmed by this. It is not a miracle thing that you're going to put in your body and just out of the blue, you're going to be healed or become a superhuman or something like that. There's a whole lot more that goes into it than that.
Yeah, thank you. And folks, if you have comments on Instagram, X, YouTube, etc., just throw them in there. We might be able to rope them in as something we can read on air and get into. Yeah, agreed, man. This is such like a skills-based thing. I think we have a little bit of alignment here. When we started offering our courses way back, I think the thing we wanted to do was help undergraduates have an easier time, because a lot of people can get lost in the sauce here, and it gets really complicated, just in the same way alcohol dependence can be complicated. Same thing with psychedelic overuse. And how do we teach undergrads, like before they're even 21, integration and preparation skills? I think that's an amazing thing to do to help people get back more.
Yep. Yeah. I outlined 8 root fundamentals of mental, emotional, spiritual skill development, and I really kind of boiled those down, over time, and distilled this idea just over decades, really, of going through my own mental health journey, and then kind of connecting with the psychedelic medicines, and then realizing what seemed to be really important. And it became really clear that our society as a whole actually has this counteracting force of momentum to a lot of those, or at least a few of those kind of pillar skills, one of which I call not doing. Some people call not doing meditation. I like to call it not doing, because meditation seems like you're still engaged in some sort of activity. I learned this by kind of not only the Qigong breathing that I was involved with, but also the reset portion of typical serotonin agonist experiences like LSD and psilocybin and mescaline. That there's that reset portion. I noticed that in that period, I was not doing anything. I would lay there and just go into myself, or into some sort of exploration of my psyche, sometimes even beyond, maybe even, the feeling of leaving my body, depending on how people may feel about that. I've certainly left my body and experienced all kinds of things. But in that place, that space of that experience, I was not engaging in an activity. I was not engaging in thought. I wasn't engaging in conversation. I was engaging in doing. I certainly wasn't spending any time on a screen or, that type of thing. And then when you look at the world around us, like how much, in this journey, me trying to build and engage in this entrepreneurial pursuit that I'm engaging with, it is completely counter to not doing. Like every moment is filled with something that I have to do. And sometimes I have to go, no, that's it. I have to sit and do nothing now, because this is going to drive me insane. Because that is the kind of toxic force there. So processing past trauma is the first one. Not doing is the second one. Connecting with nature, is extremely important for a couple of reasons. It shows the cycles of doing and not doing, but also brings you face to face with mortality. And here in the West, I think we've just kind of, brush mortality under the rug, kind of sweep it under the rug and act like it doesn't exist. And when my dad died and when my girlfriend died as well, like those were things I was more prepared because at least I'd been through my father's death. But when he died, there was no preparation. There was no understanding. There was nothing. I guess, our society expects the religious organizations to prepare you for that. That's why you go to church. That's why you apparently, but these are things I think should be taught in school. This is something you should be taught as a kid. What do you do with death? How do you deal with a painful breakup in a relationship? And I think about this through indigenous lens. And people are kind of like, look at me kind of funny. I'm like, look, why do you think a romantic relationship breakup is so painful? And I'll tell you why I believe it is. Because we were never evolved to go through that. If you think about indigenous hunter and gatherer people that were probably the very, those are the evolutionary arriving point from an actual physiological standard and engagement with the natural environment. Those people, you would never leave someone's life. Someone wouldn't just disappear. Oh, I knew that person. Now they're gone. No, this is someone who's stuck with you. Your entire experience, your whole life. And now you're in a modern world where people just come and go and leave. And it could be a broken family situation, divorce, a breakup, something like this. We don't teach people how to manage that mental health space. And then we wonder why people are, obese and delving into substance abuse at record levels and all this stuff. We don't teach fundamental skills when it comes to mental health. And that's what's more important than, like I said, than even ingesting an entheogen. Like, how much time are you spending in a state of meditation, right? Many people, almost none, right? How much time are you spending focusing on your breath? Breathing is so powerful that if you really focus on breathing enough, you can have a DMT-like experience without ever ingesting a substance. So, and that's without me going into all 8. I can go into all 8, but there's a whole lot there. It just becomes a very deep topic, and we can discuss more of them. But my point is, right, what skills are we really teaching at the informative, years level where you're in school? I would say very little to none. Just say no. Mm-hmm. DARE program. Come on.
I just finished another. First, before I do that rant, DEA came back at us here on X and said, I suggest speaking in terms of human agency and not substance agency. It's a fact that objects cannot be illegal or legal. It's a sloppy language model. So I don't know. I get a lot of action like this on Twitter. So yeah, I try. And I was thinking about it recently. It's like, yeah, it's illegal to possess this thing, and not necessarily like it's sitting on the ground and it's illegal. Like the same thing, like a mushroom comes out of the ground. It's like, it's not yet. Well, that's actually interesting. Is it when a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound when a mushroom pops up in the woods? Does it become illegal? Right. It's like not, in fact, until we actually have it in a human possession. And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, right? Because we're kind of also trying to balance this idea of natural rights with, whatever the current legal system is telling us we can and cannot do.
Have you heard about that Australian law? We met someone, was it at MJ BizCon or Remind? I forget the gentleman's name, but he's from Australia, and he actually was an attorney. And he said that in Australia, you are not allowed to pick psilocybin mushrooms from the cow dung and cow patties, but it's actually not illegal if you pick them up with your mouth and eat them directly from the cow patty. Which is rough, right? But he was saying that he would like to taunt the police by, having them see him just go, bend down and actually eat mushrooms in front of them. There's nothing they could do about it. Really odd laws, right? Just weird, drawing this line in the sand somewhere.
Oh man, that's wild. No, I haven't heard that. I think I met him though.
I think
at Remind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, can you share a little bit about, like, it seems as though you had a pretty major experience. Can you give us like a high level on an experience that like really convinced you that this was something that you needed to dig into, this psychedelic topic?
You're talking own experience with entheogen use and which one maybe had the most profound effect on me, something along those lines.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So I have a pretty vast experience with psychedelics, and in fact, because of the way that I did it, it put me in a unique position. I have a certain amount of actual psychedelic-induced PTSD from improper use of LSD and psychedelics. I took them way too far, but I don't I don't regret it either, because it's the reason I have the voice I have around the subject matter. And I don't think I would arrive there because I didn't have the mentorship. If I had mentorship and I had a guide, I think it would have been different. But there's several. I had so many experiences. That Datura shaped my whole vision of reality. That it's earth shattering in my experience of what reality is and what the universe is based off of that Datura experience. But I'm not going to speak on those. Those are all fun stories. If you ever want to go into trip stories, I could go so far into it. But I'm going to tell you about one that is for me the kind of guiding flagship experience that I had, and it was actually on Millennium New Year's 2000, when we were going into 2000, and everyone thought the computer systems were going to crash, and we were going to have like World War III and the nukes were going to launch, or things were just the financial systems were going to crash or whatever, right? It was a very interesting time in Millennium New Year's, and that day I ended up ingesting 30 tabs of LSD and 28 grams of cubensis mushrooms. I don't know the exact strain of the cubensis mushrooms. I actually had started that day around 9:30 a.m. with about 7 microdot doses of LSD. So I had kind of a pre-entry into it. And that may have had an effect on why the experience progressed the way it progressed. It was not about the LSD in the end. It was really interesting. So that evening, after a whole day of this, and I tell stories, and this one alone could be 2 hours long, but I'm not going to do that to you. I took that large amount later that evening after the first initial amount. Then I was like, hey, it's time to celebrate. My dad was dying at the time. He had just been diagnosed with the colon cancer officially, but he had been very sick for a while. My dad had been stubborn about getting checked for colon cancer. I don't know if it was that older generation pride and kind of awkwardness around that area of the body or what it was. He just didn't want to get checked, and it ended up proving to be fatal and really, really painful for him. But he was very sick and looking bad. I didn't realize at the time I had some subconscious drivers. And why would you take such a ridiculous large dose of something? And I figured out what those drivers were later. I was seeking sort of a Faustian interaction with death itself. And I certainly got something similar to that. Anyway, I took that large amount. I ended up having an experience. I was in Ocean Beach at the time down here in San Diego area. I ended up on the beach, Dog Beach, which is there. At the time, I didn't even know it was called Dog Beach. And I ended up having a profoundly frightening experience. The initial part of the experience was amazing. I was eating so much mushrooms. I remember eating those dried mushrooms this whole, and I remember feeling this feeling of like champagne. And what I mean by that is when I drink champagne, sometimes the bubbles kind of go to your head. You feel almost immediate buzz. I was eating each mushroom and it was going straight to my head, each one. I was already on LSD, so that may have been playing a role in the whole thing. I don't know. But I remember being kind of pleasant and kind of fun. And I was like, wow, this is pretty wild. But then by the time we walked down to the beach, I told my 2 friends, they were both named Mike. It was Mike and Mike, actually, Mike Brown and Mike Whitby. I went down to the beach. I was like, hey, you guys got to check out this beach, because I had walked most of the day earlier. Went down there, and that's when things turned. I began to feel the effects of what I had just done to myself, realizing, oh, crap, I've gone too far. And then I tried to go into the ocean. That particular night, the ocean was an angry ocean. It was pretty stormy out. There was some large swell coming through at the Ocean Beach Pier. I tried to go into the cold water to try and kind of shake what I was starting to feel, which was massive anxiety and panic building. My friends were very concerned that who knows what I was doing. Was I trying to commit suicide with going into this angry ocean? What was my problem? I dunked myself in the ocean, and that's when the trip began in full effect. The mushrooms popped out of my head. I don't know how to explain this to you, but every single mushroom that I ate that night, in its anatomical correctness, launched into the kind of sky area above me in sort of a semicircle, and they began laughing and talking to me in a chipmunk-like voice, asking me if I was having a good time. So they're kind of like cajoling and dancing and talking in this really high-pitched voice. Oh, you having a good time? You having a good time? Is this what you wanted? And something about that was very disconcerting and very unpleasant. And then they shifted the voice, and I say it's a they, it's really weird. I call this was my meeting, people who practice the usage of psychedelics at the truly deep entheogenic level believe they're communing with the spirit. This was my first time really engaging with the spirit of the mushrooms at that level. I'd done mushrooms many times, LSD, but I'd never spoken directly to the conduited spirit that you're engaging with. And this was my first time doing that. And it was not in a pleasant modality of like, hey, great to have you here. It was like, you know, and so what happened was the voice shifted from that high-pitched voice to what I call the rumble of the universe. And they said, you fucked up now. And that was awful. That was about the worst feeling I've ever had in my life. Then it brought out the vision that I saw was the blind scales of justice. It was the woman with the blindfold and holding scales that you see in front of courthouses. And the mushrooms told me very succinctly that I had disrespected in the way that I ate them. It wasn't really the sheer volume of what I ate. It was how the attitude I'd ate them with, this rather cavalier and brash attitude. They were not happy with me. Mushroom was not pleased, and said, that there was, on the left side of the scale was a glowing orb. On the right side of the scale was empty, and the scale was off balance by the glowing orb. It was like a glowing yellow ball, and it told me that was my life force. And they said that they were jumping on, that each mushroom that was there represented was jumping on the right side of the scale. And if they outweighed me, I was a dead man. And they said, you're a dead man, and nothing in this world will save you. And it hit me in the gut so hard. My friends around me, and it was kind of like the scene in Gladiator, that original, the first movie, where he's dying and he goes in between seeing his family and then back to, actually in the Coliseum, and he's kind of back and forth from reality to the vision. And that was kind of what was happening. My friends are there and they're like, hey man, you all right? And then I was like, no, I'm not okay. And it's funny because we kind of back in those days had this unspoken rule. It's kind of like you never admitted to anything negative on a psychedelic trip, because you just always felt like, no, you hang on, it'll be okay. You don't want to admit to anyone that you're really going through a hard time, because you don't want to like mess with anyone else's trip. And that was the first time in my life where I actually didn't even attempt. I was just like, no, things are really bad. I don't know what's going to happen to me right now. So I ended up trying to speed this up now. We ended up going back to the house that we're staying in. That was like friends thing. They went inside. They tried to kind of trip sit me for a little bit. I was kind of going back and forth looking for a sign. And what that sign is, what I understand about serotonin agonist kind of side of the psychedelic experience, what I call the teachers and protectors. There's divinators and teachers and protectors. And these are the teachers and protectors. What it is kind of what we would call it the hero's journey, right? You're presented with a challenge. You're presented with a set of obstacles. You overcome those challenges and obstacles, and then you arrive at the reward, at the hero's reward. And I think that's why we call it the hero's dose, when someone takes that amount. And that was certainly what I was on, the hero's dose. I was confronting death. Mushrooms jumped on the side of that scale, but they disappeared, and then I never saw it again. And this is one thing I want to tell you is actually really kind of cool. They morphed at the very end. Once just right after they had jumped on the scale, they morphed into, have you ever seen that? I forget how old it is, 14,000 years old or whatever. It's a glyph in a cave of the bee god, and the mushrooms are coming out of his arms and everything. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I had never seen that before. That is the being I came face to face with. I didn't see that until the last few years, where someone showed me that picture. And then I was like, oh, wait a second. Those mushrooms, instead of being separated, they morphed into some sort of Voltron and turned into that being, and then spoke to me. After the scale situation, they disappeared, and they then told me, hey, kind of in this amorphous kind of that movie Truman Show kind of way, like this overguiding kind of narrator. They told me, hey, buckle your seatbelt, because although you didn't die here, there's no way of knowing you're going to survive. The night turned into a night of schizophrenia. I actually began walking up to random strangers on the street. I thought I was in Los Angeles at one point, thought I was in San Bernardino, thought I was in San Francisco. Never had serotonin agonist psychedelics go to this level before. I mean, it was as real as you and I, as lucid dreaming, just so real though. And then I would walk up to strangers thinking they were my father, and would try to work on my relationship with my father. They would morph, and I would realize they were a stranger. I would become very embarrassed and run off. Eventually, I was talking to the president of the United States at the time, was George Bush. I believed I had an earpiece in my ear, and he was telling me that I was the source of all negativity on the planet, and that if I didn't die, that there would be a nuclear holocaust and everyone would perish, and there'd be no opportunity for humanity. It was this insane schizophrenia. And then I actually jumped in front of a vehicle trying to commit suicide that night, a bunch of things. But there's a good side to this. There's a really wild part. Why this all sounds, I know, really dark and negative. But it actually turned. When it turned, I had walked probably well over 20 miles. I kept walking in circles trying to find that sign. And I would come out of those moments of psychosis and realize what was happening, and then slip back into those psychosis kind of dreams. And then eventually ended up at a bus stop bench. The man that I got hit by his car, I actually thought it was the Secret Service, and I was trying to work with them to eliminate myself from the problem. He was very, very upset. I can't imagine how horrible a night. I feel so sorry for that guy and what I did that night. He got jumped out of a little red Fiero. I actually thought it was a white Suburban, like presidential entourage.
Mhm.
This little red Fiero, this guy speaking Spanish, just furiously yelling at me.
Yeah.
I ended up at a bus stop bench. Someone called the police. The police arrived, and here's the best part. When the police arrived, it was this divine thing where the mushrooms let me know that that was the signal that I had made it. And then the minute I saw those lights, I knew I wasn't going to die. I knew I had made it. I can't explain this to you. And this then became a master class on what the Toltecs call the art of stalking, which has to do with ego mitigation. When those police arrived, and it wasn't me, I became a puppet. I became possessed by the mushroom again. This time the mushroom entered me in this way and then began to show me how to manage authority and manage people's egos. And everything I said to those police was as positive as you could get, and everything was the truth. Police came up to me and they were pissed off. They're working on Millennium New Year's, and they said to me, "Hey, what the hell's your problem, buddy? What's going on?" And I went, "Oh, let me tell you, I took too much. I took way too much. I made a terrible mistake." They go, "What'd you take?" I said, "Well, I took mushrooms and LSD." They went, "Okay, where's the LSD? Put your hands behind your back and start searching me." I was like, "Oh, you guys want to do acid?" I was like, "Just don't make the mistake I made." It was really funny how this was unfolding. The minute that happened, I left my body, went into the center of the universe, and I have this natural inclination. Happens to me when I do DMT as well. I go into the cosmos. So I was like in the center of the Milky Way looking at gas nebula and forming stars and things like that. And then I hear from a distance, it seems like a million miles away, "Hey buddy, hey, where's the acid?" And then I snap back into my body. I'm like, "Oh yeah, let me tell you where it is." This went on for 3 times. I ended up getting these guys to laugh and just have such a good time. These cops were in piss off moods. They were just loving it. Then they're like, "Hey, look, we know you're not a danger. We know we're not going to charge you with anything, but we do have to take you in because you've admitted to doing these drugs. We're just going to make sure you're not a danger to yourself or others." Brought me into this Ward B type facility where there was all these doctors and healthcare practitioners who were just furious. They're just in a crappy mood. And I just was like, "Hey guys, you have no idea how much gratitude you should have right now. Like I almost died like 50 times tonight. I'm telling you, I'm so thankful to be here." And I began to get a smile to kind of show on every one of those people's faces. And the most interesting part was they wanted me to give a urine sample. And I swear to you, the mushrooms did not want me to give them a urine sample. And there's an interesting thing with psychedelics and authority. And I think that's why authority and psychedelics have not worked well together. I will tell you that the psilocybin deity, the mushroom there, is not truly a fan of authority, but it doesn't deal with it in a buck authority directly way. It does it in a very artistic and funny way. They sent me into the bathroom to urinate in a cup to give them a sample. I went into the bathroom. I'm urinating in this cup. I look over to my right and there's a mirror. And I'm at this point now where I'm starting to be able to enjoy the psychedelic experience because none of that was enjoyable. That was a nightmare. And now I'm on the tail end of the most extreme, I don't know if it's the most extreme, one of the most extreme experiences I've ever had. And my hallucinatory capability at this point was extreme. I look over to my right and there's a full-size mirror in the bathroom. And then I've got the cup and I'm peeing in the cup and then I finish peeing, but now I'm staring in the mirror and my eyes are portals. My eyes are portals to another dimension. And I went to this like yellow sand swept dimension in another planet, or I don't even know what it is. And I'm there exploring and then I hear knocking on the door and it's like before where it seems like it's really far away. I come back to myself. I look down at this cup of pee and I go, "Why am I holding pee?" And I dump the pee in the toilet, throw it in the trash. I come out, I'm like, "What's up?" And the cop's like, "Where's the sample?" And so then I tell the cop, just like I'm telling you, I'm like, "Oh my God, you won't believe what just happened to me. I was in another dimension in some weird windswept yellow sand place. I look down and I'm like, why am I holding this cup of piss? Gross." And I dump it out and threw the cup away. And the cop, instead of getting angry, he just starts laughing. Right? Because cops don't like it when you just buck their authority, but that's not what I was doing, right? But it wasn't me, it was the mushroom. I ended up getting put in a cell. It was like a Ward B type cell with a bunk and stuff. I sat in there and then I slowly drifted off into the void of nothingness. And when I woke up, I was myself. I was my old ego. It was all the things again. And I was furious. I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I'm in jail. I actually had a bunch of LSD that they didn't find. It was caught in a lighter. I had this little way of hiding things. the sort of smuggler's trick that I had. I didn't know if they were going to find that, know what was going to happen. I'm like, oh crap. And I lost all that peace in that amazing place that I was at. But that stuck with me for many years. My belief is that I had transcended some portion of ego. I know ego is a loaded word, so I want to be careful with it because some people see the definition of ego a certain way. When I mention ego the way I'm going to mention, I had a podcast called PEMPOD, that's Pragmatic Ego Management. I'm talking about only the negative portion of ego, the side of the ego that's only about the past, the future, comparison, the never satisfied, the always searching for, an issue, a problem. That part of ourself that seems to be, I've arrived at a place I believe that is our evolutionary stopgap to becoming the stewards of our planet and an interstellar species. I don't believe in a parasitic interstellar species that's out there trying to take resources from another planet. I don't think you could achieve interstellar capability. That all comes from a lot of these experiences. So that mushroom experience showed me how powerful the ego is. It showed me how it's interacting and functioning at a level of every level of society, and how it leads to the conflicts and the problems, and how you can shape around that to change it and impact people's lives, to make them brighten up and have a smile and have a total different experience based off your energy that you bring to the table. That was what made that so powerful, was that I saw people who were suffering, who were miserable or unhappy or angry, who didn't want to be there, all of a sudden have a beaming smile on their face. And I went, that is it. That's the thing. That's the it factor. So that's the story.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thanks for sharing that. It's a robust one. And I can only hope the mushrooms help me have that much luck with law enforcement in the future.
Yeah, right.
And hopefully I never have that scenario. But that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that certainly would change your mind around, change your world perspective, right? Like that's a very big one. Especially because in my mind that you're interacting with the 3D world, the normal world at the same time. Like that adds some color.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, wow, good for you for not ending up there. And I like this as a cautionary tale, Lewis, too. Like, hey, this stuff can happen.
Yeah.
I like you're pushing the limits. I've had some pushing the limits stories, but I don't think anywhere close to as extreme as that.
Well, and it doesn't take that. I've seen people take one tab of acid and go straight into a psychotic experience. So, for me, my threshold was far higher, apparently, and for whatever reasons, it went that way. But to add to your cautionary, note there, I think that the proper guidance, I've actually now had real successful engagements with people who have gone into psychosis, and I've been able to help pull them out through some understandings I have that are a direct result of that trip and others, that I understand that the ego is not something you directly engage with. So when if you're a facilitator, if you're someone who engages with medicine, and you've ever had this happen before, where someone completely snaps into a psychosis and is not even within the realms of what we consider normal reality, and you can't seem to get them there, never try and argue with them or reason with them or any of that. You actually need to engage in completely different alternative methods, whether it's something shocking, stand on your head, be quiet, toning exercises, put them in freezing cold water. You have to do things unpredictable and don't seem logical. And there's a whole process to that we can discuss. I don't know how much time we have, but I want to, there's a whole thing to this that came out of what we're talking about that I learned from that experience and others. Yeah.
So we've got about 5 minutes to go. So if you want to put some things in, let's do it. Like, where do we want to go?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah. So let's remind everybody what we're here talking about. Let's talk about Psychedelist. Remind folks that might just be tuning in, and remind the podcast, listeners, and then we can jump into that story a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
So what is Psychedelist again?
Yeah. So Psychedelist is a global community support and advertising platform offering all things supportive in this emerging psychedelic renaissance that we're engaging in here, right? Treatment, advice, learning opportunities, even products and those things, you name it. It's a huge space, over 3,300 published web pages there and growing. So it's really large. Our ethos and focus is on skill development. We're really trying to engage in harm reduction without restriction, without mandating and telling people what they should and shouldn't do. Just saying, hey, there's risks involved. These are things you should be aware of. Please, please, please educate yourself and train with others and seek out guidance to do this, what I would is the safer and better bet than the way I went about it, right? I went about it the wrong way, guys. You don't want psychedelic-induced PTSD. Believe me, it's a pain. I have friends who say to me, hey, man, this is kind of wild because the medicine that could heal you is also now part of the problem. And you don't want to be in that situation. I would caution people, don't take my road. So that's why Psychedelist really was begun. So it's a very large web platform. Find guides, facilitators, treatment professionals, all kinds, products, attorneys, lab testing, services, schooling, training, accreditation program coming soon, and ancillary support services for those businesses offering services. That's what it is.
Amazing. All right, let's go a little bit more into the well, actually, let's do one thing first. So let's talk about something that my listeners will be curious about. So like, how do safety, right? Like, how are people acknowledging and like handling safety and just understanding risks on the platform?
So it depends on from which contextual level you mean that. If you mean that with us and the administrative side of the platform ourselves, there's two major points of concern and pain points that we're worried about. One is the product side. Product side is easier to manage than the facilitator treatment side. The reason the product side is easier is because we just want to know what you're putting in it, and we want to know that people are aware of the potency and the presence of whatever it is they're engaging with and purchasing off there. And that's not that hard to do because all we need is laboratory testing for that and requiring samples from those new listers. And then we're working further towards integrating that with lab testing, packaged promotional deals that we're going to do through the site. So one of the things that happened in the cannabis industry, right, is we started to see that there's this kind of, I don't know if not nepotism, what would you call it, bias that's happening where cannabis producers and product merchants are paying labs to give them the results they want. We don't want to see that happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to be the middleman of those results. We're actually going to offer promotional packages that include lab testing. We're the ones that pay the lab, and then the merchant sends their products to the lab. And so we're trying to add a layer to get in the way of some of that type of stuff that we've seen go on. And then there's even a higher level of that with like the secret shopper level of lab testing, where we're trying to see that these merchants are maintaining that level of standard that we see with their initial first tested products. And so that's one of the ways that we're doing that. We even do some in-house testing, if you will. Some of us actually try the products. Yeah, that's a little easier. When you get to treatment professionals, much more difficult. And that's where we need to see the revenue come in. We need more staffing. We do have review features in place so people can share their experiences. We're going to be embedding a Discord where people can have in real time discussions around maybe their experiences or what's going on, and possibly even some of the providers and people that have experience and maybe knowledge in certain areas can engage with people and have these type of discussions. But also staffing. We're going to have staffing that flies down to Costa Rica, flies to Jamaica, Peru, wherever, right here in the United States, and does an audit. We want to see what is going on at these ceremonies and places like that. But I'll be honest, it's a very heavy lift. We are not there yet, and so we don't have enough to say that every single treatment professional is on our platform is 100% vetted. We cannot say that right now. So I would like to be able to do that. We need to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And how about like just people should know that if they're putting stuff online, it's not exactly private, right? Like, I think that's just a fundamental point, and everybody should know that in 2025. If you don't, you're a little behind. And yeah, I'm teaching a cybersecurity course right now, and we chatted about that a little bit like a couple weeks back, and I'm just like, come on, guys, like, you gotta understand. Like, I saw some people transacting in like these public groups with their name, their photo, and their cell phone number. It's like, come on, guys, please be a little safer here.
Low-hanging fruit.
Right.
Law enforcement, just to talk about that, law enforcement is an ROI business just like any other. They work on return on investment. Let me tell you though, you make yourself low-hanging fruit, and it's not going to take them very much to bag you. they're going to come get you. So yeah, doing stuff like that is probably not the brightest. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So amazing. So, how can people get involved? Like, where's your website, and how can they start using it?
100%. So Psychedelist is a play on words, guys. Remember, I mentioned kind of the dentist, physicist, violinist. Spell the word psychedelics, but replace the ICS with IST. So it's Psychedelist. I can spell it all out just to be super clear. P is in Paul, S is in Sam, Y, C is in Charlie, H, Y. Hang on. Now I'm spelling it out. Psychid, E-D. I'm botching the whole thing. Sorry. P-S-Y-C-H-E, D is in Delta, E-L-I-S is in Sam, T is in Tom. Sorry about that, guys. .com. It'll take you directly to the treatment side. We used to have a landing page. We don't have anymore. It goes straight to the treat. So you're going to see a sub URL that says psychedelist.com/treat. And then you'll also see a bunch of other resource headings at the top of your page where you can look at products, the lab section, which isn't fully, it's not populated at all right now because we're doing that further integration. And attorneys, we need far more attorneys. Know any attorneys out there, please send them our way. Learning centers there, all of that stuff. So that's the URL to find us. You also can find our social on Facebook. It's psychedelist.com. We've also got a Psychedelist. It's _Psychedelist_ for Instagram. Same for X. Don't have too much going on X or anything like that. So those are the main ones we got going on. Well, not X, sorry, Instagram. We've got X. And that's, yeah, basically find it. We also have a YouTube, but that one's a weird one. I'd have to even get you like the link for that because we lost a bunch of channels. YouTube kept like throwing us out. It kept having to do new ones, so it doesn't measure up. But yeah, psychedelist.com, guys. It's right there. It'll pop right up if you search it in Google. We pop up first for the name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Louis, thanks so much for this. This has been really fun, educational, and I'm really gonna, keep the 30-hit experience day for a little while longer, and then yeah, that could last so long.
Yeah, it's that wasn't my only one. I did a 60-hit LSD trip 6 months prior to that. That was because of my father's illness, and then there's so many stories. You ever want to talk story just about crazy experiences? Happy to do it with you, Joe.
No, man, amazing. All right, Louis. Well, thanks for this. Let's hang out backstage for a minute. And then, yeah, thank you all for tuning in and hope we can do more in the future.
All right. Thank you, everybody.